But as time went on, one of his buddies that had been in the military with him came out from Maryland to Fort Collins and he actually came out even before Scott mustered out of the military because he had gotten to be a friend of Scott's and he thought Scott had told him a little bit about the country out here and he was an Eastern kind of guy. He wanted to come and check out how people are in Colorado. At any rate, I began to have some conversation with him after he came out and after Scott was killed in the auto wreck. And he suspicioned that Scott had more than diabetes. He said those guys who went over there were inoculated with anthrax vaccinations. And he said it was his conviction that there was something in the vaccinations that were causing the problem. Over time, all of that became very verified because I began to follow this thing on alternative radio. There's a radio station there in Johnstown that had different people that had insights into what was going on. And as this thing developed, lo and behold, these Gulf War veterans, over the years after 1991, 1992, 1993, there became a whole huge number of them that began to have all these symptoms and problems and so forth. Well, our government is covering it all up. They're not denying, you would never hear about it in the mainstream media. But this was all done deliberately. Those guys were just experimental guinea pigs. They knew that those anthrax vaccinations were dangerous. They knew that when they gave them to them. And I lost track of all that, although I have some videos and audios at home that I've gathered over time. But we came to realize that, of course, what happened was that they were vaccinated with these tainted anthrax vaccinations. And literally thousands of those guys died from those vaccinations. You'll never hear about it in the news. And many, many, many more of them became basically debilitated. My son would not have lived any kind of normal life. In fact, he might not have even survived. But he had all these symptoms and his immune system was totally destroyed. We go from a very virile, sharp guy with a lot of ability, natural ability, very intelligent. He was a leader of people and destroyed him. He basically destroyed him. He left behind a wife and a little daughter, and at the time of his death, his wife was pregnant with their second child, which was a boy, born later without a father. Thanks to this whole scenario, he had gotten to where he was drinking some. He couldn't deal with it, couldn't cope with it. He couldn't cope with everything that was going on with him because he was always a kid that could always do what he set out to do. He was always able to do that, and here he is basically unable to even hardly function, and it was just destroying him inside. But this was all done. I don't know how many thousands of those guys died from those vaccinations. I don't know how many multiplied thousands are ill and debilitated even to this day. That's 19 years ago when this all happened. And the Gulf War syndrome was covered up by the government, even though there was a massive amount of effect from it. There were some people that got behind it and tried to expose it. There was a lady named Joyce Riley who was a captain in the Air Force Reserve, and she had been involved in some of the troop flyouts. She worked out of an airplane. She was a registered nurse, and she actually got the Gulf War syndrome. But she escaped a real bad case of it. But she got out and began to expose this thing. And she got on the radio, and they did videos, and they did just everything they could do to get the word out, because her whole goal was to help these guys that had been basically destroyed by the vaccine.
It is mentioned in this book.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a sad story. That's what you're faced with these vaccinations.
And it must have been really challenging just to say that story. Thank you. I know that hits the place where it's most dear to us. So I'd like you to all know about this book. It was just released. I got 1 of 2 copies left from Amazon. And this talks about what he's talking about, vaccine A. We're talking about the anthrax vaccine. Javier, would you please give us just a little bit about what he started to read this. I gave him some homework. If you could just give us a little overview of what you were reading so far in the book.
I actually forgot the exact statistics that were in there, but with the basically with the Gulf War veterans who came back with Gulf War syndrome, there were 2 groups. There was one who got the actual anthrax vaccine, and one who got the placebo. And those who were not 0% of those soldiers were not inoculated with the vaccine came up with Gulf War syndrome, and it was up to 93% of the ones who were vaccinated got Gulf War syndrome. I also wanted to comment that the explanation that Kool-Aid caused type 1 insulin-dependent autoimmune diabetes is totally false. That's not medically possible. Type 2 diabetes is caused by excess sugar consumption over a long period of time. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune process, which is a far more likely explanation of it is caused by the vaccination. And the anthrax vaccines were not optional. I have a friend who went to military prison for 6 years because he refused to get his vaccine. He got tired of being in prison, and he went ahead and got it afterwards. He got very sick, but he survived. And he eventually got over, it took him about a year to get over all the problems that he had. He just, experienced extreme fatigue, rashes, and he eventually got over it, but he actually went to prison because he refused it for 6 years.
Thank you. This is our own Pueblo chieftain last week. Swine flu on the way back, and if you'd like to take a look at this, and if you want a copy, it's in the archives, of course, the Pueblo chieftain. But they're making the comment that a swine flu vaccine must arrive in time. Well,
what's the date, sir?
This is last week, Saturday, July 25th. And it is on page 2. Well, it's right in the back of the... It's page 4, excuse me, 4.
What was the date on that?
25th July. And when I read that, my eyebrow went up. And the eyebrow went up because they're obviously getting the hopes up for the public. I'm giving you my impression, okay, my opinion. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, first paragraph, Atlanta, in a disturbing new projection, health officials say up to 40% of Americans could get swine flu this year.